Well, fellas, if you take a look at the champions we have in the UFC right now, it's hard to deny that we're dealing with some seriously talented fighters. So I'm going to go through every current UFC champion and talk about the best and worst. Thing about each one, starting with none other than Tom Aspinall. I think the best thing about Tom Aspinall is that he's probably the most skilled heavyweight we've ever seen in MMA history. And I know that statement can confuse people, so let me be clear, I'm not saying he's unbeatable. Of course, if he fought a prime Francis Ngannou, there's a very real chance he could get knocked out. We've seen Aspinall get clipped before by Pavlovich, and one clean shot from Ngannou could be the end of the night for him. The same could be said if he fought prime Fedor Emelianenko, who was a nightmare matchup for anyone in his time, or legends like Cain Velasquez, Jr. dos Santos, or John Jones, all of whom could pose serious problems. So I'm not saying he's favored over every heavyweight ever, but from a pure skills perspective, he's unmatched. He moves like a welterweight, which is unheard of at heavyweight. I think he's the fastest man to ever compete in the division. He's a legitimate BJJ black belt, and it shows he's a great wrestler. As we saw early in his UFC career, he's a KO puncher, which has been obvious in his recent fights, and statistically, he's a monster. He has the shortest average fight time. In UFC history, the shortest bottom position time in UFC history, a 100% takedown defense rate, and perfect accuracy in his own takedowns. People like to call Cyril Gane the new breed of heavyweight because he's light on his feet. But Tom Aspinall is the real new breed, combining speed, power, technical striking, and elite grappling in one package. That's what I love about him. He might be the start of a new era at heavyweight, but the worst thing about Aspinall is that there's basically no competition for him in his division. The biggest threats were Francis Ngannou and John Jones, but Ngannou left the UFC after beating Gane, went into boxing against Fury and Joshua, and then joined the PFL, while John Jones frankly avoided Aspinall for months before vacating the belt. Now Aspinall is booked to fight Cyril Gane, but Gane has been submitted by John Jones, was out-wrestled by Ngannou, and arguably robbed Alexander Volkov in his last fight, with his best win being Sergey Spivak, whom I think Aspinall beats easily. Even Jelton Almeida has been finished by Curtis Blades, had no moments against Derek Lewis, and was losing to Sergey Spivak when they fought. Plus, he has no top 7 wins. There's just not much left for Aspinall to prove against the current crop. Moving on to Magomed Ankalaev. The best thing about him is that he always seems to have a solid game plan for every opponent. That's why he's on a long unbeaten streak at 21-1, for example, against Alex Pereira. He mixed his striking and grappling to avoid standing in the pocket too long against one of the division's hardest hitters, against Alexander Rakic, a low-output striker. He simply outworked him with volume while mixing in takedowns against Johnny Walker, a chinny striker. He found the shot and knocked him out against Jan Blachowicz once his legs got chewed up. He switched gears and relied heavily on his grappling. You never know which Ankalaev you're going to get in a fight. He can be wrestler. Ankalaev striker. Ankalaev, or well-rounded Ankalaev, that adaptability is his greatest strength. The downside is he's just a bit boring, both in personality and sometimes in fighting style. He has no memorable quotes, barely speaks in public, doesn't promote himself, and seems almost absent from social media. His Twitter is run by Ali Abdelaziz, and when he does fight, his style isn't always crowd-pleasing, like holding Pereira against the cage in a safe but uneventful fight, or having a slow-paced 15-minute bout with Rakic. His fight with Blachowicz had long stretches of nothing happening. So while he's effective, it's hard for fans to get excited about him. Next is Dricus du Plessis, and the best thing about him is that he's the best trash talker in the UFC right now. He verbally destroyed Sean Strickland in their first press conference when Strickland was riding high as one of the best talkers in the sport. He completely got under Strickland's skin, cooked him so bad, Strickland was visibly angry and lost his composure. He did the same thing to Israel Adesanya, making Adesanya emotional at the press conference, to the point where it looked like he was cracking under the pressure. In their rematch press conference, he cooked Strickland again, and on social media, he's been lighting up Khamzat Chimaev in the build-up to their fight, so much so that one of the most anticipated things about that matchup is what Dricus will do to Khamzat on the mic. The man is the king of verbal warfare. The worst thing about Dricus is that it's hard to rally behind him because of his awkward and sometimes sloppy style. In almost all his UFC fights, he's looked like he's losing at some point, nearly finished by Trevin Giles, nearly stopped by Darren Till, out-wrestled by Derek Brunson, arguably lost to Strickland, and was losing to Adesanya before pulling out a win. He has this chaotic, almost goofy approach that somehow works, but doesn't inspire total confidence in Fans, Jack Della Maddalena's best trait is that he's the most entertaining welterweight champion we've had in over a decade, after a run of relatively boring champions like Bilal Muhammad Leon Edwards and late career Kamaru Usman JDM's. First title fight against Bilal was an instant fight of the year contender. He walks forward, imposes his boxing game plan, and delivers exciting fights regardless of his opponent's style. His UFC record is full of bonuses, and he even made a fight. With Bilal one of the most notoriously safe fighters, thrilling the problem is his resume isn't stacked with top-tier wins before the title shot. He beat 3 low-level UFC opponents, had a split decision with Basil Hafez, who's 1-2 in the UFC, and another split with Kevin Holland, then beat Gilbert Burns, who's now on a 4-fight losing streak. His title shot came after a long layoff because Shavkat Rakhmonov wasn't available, so we still haven't seen him against the divisions. Other top contenders like Usman Brady Shavkat or Ian Gary. Ilia Topuria's best trait is simple. He's the best fighter in the sport today. Undefeated at 17-0 after dominating Bryce Mitchell, battering Josh Emmett, and then going on arguably the best 3-fight run in UFC history, knocking out Alexander Volkanovski when Volk was undefeated at featherweight, then knocking out Max Holloway, who had never been finished before, and finally knocking out Charles Oliveira, a former lightweight. Champion? He's a cheat code. Everything he says he'll do. He does. The only knock against him is that he's become the sport's supervillain by taking out all the fan favorites. Volk, Max, and Oliveira, all beloved fighters, he beats them one after another with ruthless efficiency and even says villainous things like, "I'm sorry it had to be you," to Oliveira. Max Holloway, as BMF champion, has the best quality of always delivering entertaining fights. Win or lose, he's had classics against Calvin Kattar, Yair Rodriguez, Arnold Allen, Korean Zombie, Justin Gaethje, and more. You always know you'll get a fun fight with Max. The downside is, he can't seem to accept his loss to Topuria, making excuses about the BMF belt not being on the line when he got knocked out by Ilia, which delegitimizes the belt. Alexander Volkanovski is the most likable fighter in the sport. He's authentic, makes no excuses. Even after losses, stays active and engages with fans. Genuinely, the concern is, he might retire too late. He's so obsessed with fighting that after his KO loss to Makhachev, he openly admitted he needs constant training to feel right. Then fought Topuria. Just months later, he's 36. And 1 or 2 more bad losses could damage his legacy. Merab Dvalishvili's best attribute is that he's a cheat code against any style. He's beaten elite strikers, elite wrestlers, and well-rounded fighters alike. No one can stop his relentless pace and grappling pressure. He's like the Usyk of bantamweight, always finding a way to win. The knock on him is he lacks finishing ability, with most of his big wins going to decision, and little visible damage on his opponents, even in dominant wins. Alexandre Pantoja's best trait is his willingness to fight anyone, anywhere. Anytime. His resume is stacked with wins over Moreno 3 times, Figueiredo Brandon Royval twice, Kai Kara France twice, and more. He's already lapped the division, but still calls for new challenges, including Joshua Van and even Horiguchi. The only mild criticism is that he should chase greatness at 135 because he's so far ahead at flyweight and could be a real threat to Merab. That's the best and worst of every current UFC champion right now.